It's a scientific fact, or at least it should be, that the most dangerous substance in the universe isn't enriched uranium, or the swirling maw of a black hole, or even the questionable contents of a 3-day-old gas station burrito. No, the most potent, destructive, and utterly illogical force known to man is a middle-aged woman armed with a clipboard, a freshly laminated ID badge that says HOA President, and a soul powered by unadulterated entitlement. The very laws of physics seem to warp around the gravitational pull of such a creature's ego. Time, space, common sense, they all crumble into dust before the righteous fury of someone who has discovered a dandelion poking its cheerful yellow head through a crack in your driveway. Her name, as if ordained by the cosmos for maximum irony, was Karen. And on this sweltering Tuesday morning, Karen, in her beige visor and a tennis skirt that screamed, "I demand to speak to the manager of this planet," had decided to declare war on my father's ability to perform the very basic human function of breathing. I was in my kitchen, the glorious aroma of freshly ground, overpriced coffee beans filling the air, my phone propped up against a canister of flour. On the screen was my dad, his face a roadmap of 78 well-lived years, sitting in his favorite recliner in the living room. A thin, clear tube ran from his nose to the quiet, humming oxygen concentrator in the corner, a machine that was both his lifeline and a constant, gentle reminder of his body's betrayal. He had the lungs of a moth-eaten sweater, but his wit was as sharp as ever. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice a familiar, gentle rasp that carried the warmth of 1,000 bedtime stories and scraped-knee reassurances. "You shelled out $12 for a single cup of coffee that, by your own admission, tastes like dirt and existential dread?" "It's artisanal, Dad," I chuckled, pouring the hot water over the grounds in a slow, circular motion. "It's supposed to taste like that. It's how you know it's working. It has notes of toasted almond and a hint of blueberry." "It has notes of you being scammed, is what it has," he shot back. "In my day, we got our caffeine from a percolator pot that had been stewing for 3 days on a hot plate in the firehouse. Cost $0.25. And 1 cup would give you the strength and the nerve to punch a bear." I laughed. "That's great, Dad, but I'm fresh out of bears to punch." "Well, you never know when one might wander into the yard," he said sagely. "It's best to be prepared. This is suburbia, son. The bears are just better dressed." His words were cut short by a small, insistent beep from the living room. It was the concentrator. A little yellow light, no bigger than a ladybug, began to flash. Low supply. The machine was a marvel, pulling oxygen from the ambient air, but it needed a baseline supply from the pressurized tanks to work at peak efficiency, especially on humid days like this, when the air was thick enough to chew. It was no big deal. The weekly delivery from MediPro was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. 9:25 a.m., as reliable as the sunrise. "Speak of the devil, and he shall appear, driving a white panel van," I said. "The oxygen cavalry is on its way." I lived in a planned community that looked like it had been designed by a committee of people who found the color beige to be a thrilling, almost recklessly bold aesthetic choice. The lawns were emerald green carpets of impossible perfection. The mailboxes were identical black sentinels standing at attention. And the trees were pruned with a geometric precision that bordered on obsessive-compulsive. It was a place of oppressive tranquility, a suburban utopia where the loudest permissible sound was the gentle hiss-thwack of a sprinkler system. And presiding over this beige kingdom, clipboard in hand, was Queen Karen. My phone buzzed with a notification. "Your MediPro delivery has arrived. Perfect." I grabbed my wallet from the counter, gave Dad a thumbs up through the doorway, and headed outside, stepping from my air-conditioned sanctuary into the thick, humid embrace of a mid-July morning. I was expecting a routine exchange, a quick signature on a digital tablet, a friendly nod to the driver, and a fresh supply of life-sustaining gas for the man who taught me how to throw a baseball. What I found instead was a tableau of bureaucratic warfare. The MediPro delivery truck, a standard white Ford Transit, was parked at the curb. The driver, a young guy with dark circles under his eyes and a weary slump to his shoulders, was standing beside it, locked in a tense standoff with Karen. She clutched her clipboard to her chest like a riot shield, her other hand pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at the curb. "I don't know how I can make this any clearer for you," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending patience one might use to explain the concept of gravity to a particularly dim-witted houseplant. "This curb," she gestured to a faint, freshly painted yellow line, no wider than a piece of spaghetti, "is a designated no parking zone between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays. This is for aesthetic uniformity and to ensure an unobstructed view for our residents as they pull out of their driveways." The driver, whose name tag read Marco, ran a tired hand through his hair. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not parking to go to the beach. I'm delivering. This is a medical supply delivery. It's oxygen. For a patient. It's, kind of important." "The rules," Karen said, her eyes narrowing into slits, "are also important. They are the very bedrock of our community's property values. The bylaws are explicit. I can quote them for you if you'd like. Section 7, subparagraph B. I decided it was time to deploy my own brand of diplomacy. "Morning, Karen," I said, forcing a pleasant smile. "Everything okay here?" Her head snapped towards me, a predator sensing new prey. "Alex, I'm glad you're here. Perhaps you can explain to this gentleman that our community guidelines are not mere suggestions. They are the covenant that separates us from chaos." "I'm sure he understands that, Karen," I said, my voice a placid lake on the surface, but underneath, a volcano of molten rage was starting to bubble. "But this is a medical delivery for my dad. It's literally the air he breathes. Can we maybe, just this once, make an exception for, life support?" "An exception?" She laughed, a short, sharp, humorless bark that startled a nearby robin from its perch. "Oh, Alex, you're always so dramatic. Exceptions are a slippery slope. A very slippery, dangerous slope. First, it's a medical truck parking on a yellow line for 10 minutes. Then it's a 16-foot inflatable Santa Claus on your lawn in July. Then, before you know it, the whole neighborhood's property values have plummeted, the hedges are overgrown, and we're living in anarchy." Marco the driver looked at me, his expression a perfect, heartbreaking blend of desperation and disbelief. "My next stop is 30 miles away. I'm on a tight schedule. I can't park a quarter mile down the street at the visitor's lot. These tanks are 100 pounds each. It would take me half an hour to wheel them up here one by one with a hand truck." "Then I suggest you get started," Karen said with a prim, self-satisfied smile. She then turned her venomous gaze to the truck itself. "And if this vehicle is not moved in the next 5 minutes, I will have it towed. And fined. The HOA has a very lucrative arrangement with a very prompt local towing service." The fight visibly drained out of Marco. He was a cog in a massive machine, and this particular gear, this Karen-shaped obstruction, was immovable. He looked at me, at his watch, then back at the unyielding figure of suburban tyranny. "Look, man," he said to me, his voice low with defeat. "I'm sorry, I really am, but I can't get towed. I'll lose my job. I'll have to reschedule the delivery. The earliest I can get back out to this area is next Tuesday." "Next Tuesday?" The two words hung in the thick, humid air like a death sentence. My father's current supply wouldn't last the rest of the day. His small, portable backup tanks were for emergencies only. A trip to the doctor, a power outage. They held a few hours' worth at best. Not enough for a week of waiting for Karen's iron-fisted reign to permit another delivery attempt. In that instant, watching the MediPro truck pull away from the curb and seeing Karen's smug, triumphant little smile as she made a neat checkmark on her clipboard, something inside me snapped. A switch was flipped. The quiet, coffee-sipping, bear-punch-avoiding Alex, who lived in a beige house and politely tolerated HOA meetings, checked out. The man who spent 15 years as a senior logistics coordinator for the U.S. Army. The man who once sourced and delivered a replacement engine for a C-130 Hercules transport plane that was stranded on a dirt runway in the middle of the Hindu Kush in under 12 hours, checked in. I gave Karen a slow, deliberate nod, letting my smile fade. "You're absolutely right, Karen," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "The rules are important. They must be respected." I turned and walked back into my house, my mind already a blazing furnace of calculations, flight paths, payload capacities, and righteous, magnificent revenge. She wanted to play by the rules. Fine. I had a whole different rule book. It was thicker, written in a language she wouldn't understand, and bound in military-grade titanium, and she was about to get a masterclass in it. The cool air of the house was a stark contrast to the heat of my burgeoning fury. In the living room, Dad was chuckling at the TV, where a cowboy in a ridiculously oversized white hat had just outsmarted the black-hatted villain. The quiet, rhythmic hiss of the concentrator was no longer a comforting sound. It was a ticking clock, each hiss a second lost. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my heart hammering a frantic, percussive rhythm against my ribs. Panicking was a luxury I couldn't afford. Action was a necessity. I walked into the living room, composing my face into a mask of casual reassurance. "Hey, looks like there was a bit of a mix-up with the delivery company," I said, my voice as smooth and placid as a mountain lake at dawn. "They sent the wrong type of tanks or something. Bureaucratic snafu, you know how it is." He squinted at me over the top of his reading glasses, his internal lie detector humming. "A snafu? You look like you just planned an invasion." "Just a minor skirmish," I said with a wink. "I'm getting it sorted out. They're going to do a special rush delivery for us to make up for it." He grunted, seemingly satisfied, and turned back to his movie. "A special delivery? For us? Are we finally getting that pony I asked for Christmas in 1952? "Even better," I promised. "Just hang tight. I've got it under control." I retreated to my home office, a small room crammed with bookshelves groaning under the weight of military histories, supply chain management textbooks, and for some reason a surprisingly thick volume on advanced knot tying. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding like the arming of a weapon. I pulled out my phone, my thumb flying across the screen as I scrolled to a contact list that would have given any self-respecting HR manager a full-blown aneurysm. This wasn't my list of dentists, plumbers, and accountants. This was my break glass in case of global thermonuclear war list. The world has gone irretrievably mad, and I need a much, much bigger hammer list. The first call was to a man known to me and a select few others only as Crazy Ivan. We'd served 2 tours together in Afghanistan. He had a legendary reputation for flying anything, anywhere, anytime, with a cheerful and complete disregard for minor inconveniences like enemy fire, treacherous mountain passes, or, in this particular case, restrictive suburban zoning laws. After leaving the service, he'd started a private charter company out of a regional airport 100 miles south, mostly flying obscenely wealthy executives to remote fishing lodges in Canada. He answered on the second ring, his voice a jovial boom. Talk to me, Goose. Ivan, it's Alex. I have a situation. A situation, you say? What flavor are we talking? Financial, marital, or the classic, I woke up in a Tijuana jail wearing a sombrero and I don't know how I got here? Logistical, I said, my words clipped and precise as I began to pace the small room. I need an aerial delivery. Package is delicate. It's medical oxygen. A dozen H-tanks, crated. Landing zone is my backyard. Hostile local authority is present and active. There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low, appreciative whistle. Hostile like small arms fire and RPGs hostile, or clipboard and a bad attitude hostile? Clipboard, I confirmed. But she has the eyes of a predator, and she has weaponized a set of HOA bylaws with extreme prejudice. Ivan let out a deep, rumbling chuckle that sounded like rocks in a tumble dryer. Ah, the clipboard Karens, the deadliest species of them all. They have no soul, my friend. Okay, I can do it, but it's gonna cost you a lot. This isn't my usual scenic tour package. I'll have to divert the Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, which is my biggest bird. You sure your backyard can handle her? The Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. My grin was so wide, it hurt my cheeks. It was his pride and joy. A decommissioned CH-47 Chinook helicopter. The twin-rotor beast of burden famous for its use in Vietnam and beyond. He'd bought it at a military surplus auction and had it repainted for civilian use, but it still possessed all the grace and subtlety of a sledgehammer smashing through a stained glass window. It was perfect. My yard can handle it, I said, a surge of adrenaline making me feel 10 feet tall. Put it on my tab. And Ivan, make it big, make it loud. That's the only way I know how to do business, my friend, he boomed. ETA is 40 minutes, give or take. Text me the coordinates and a picture of the LZ. Call 2 was to Big T. Big T, whose real name was Terrence, was a mountain of a man who ran a heavy machinery and logistics company that could, I was convinced, procure anything from a box of paperclips to a small, lightly used battleship on less than 24 hours' notice. Alex, my man! His voice boomed into the phone, threatening to crack the speaker. What's shakin', Bacon? T, I need a favor, and I need it fast. I need a flatbed truck with a high-capacity forklift and a 2-man crew. They need to be at my address in 35 minutes on standby for a rapid unload. The job itself will be fast, but it requires absolute precision. I want you to think NASCAR pit crew, but for cargo. Say no more, T said without a moment's hesitation. What's the cargo? A dozen crated oxygen tanks. Consider it done. My guys are the best. They once moved a priceless grand piano out of a 3rd-story penthouse window during a hurricane just for a bet. This'll be a walk in the park for them. You got trouble with the local fun police again? You have no earthly idea, I said. My third and final call was the most delicate. I had to navigate the bureaucratic labyrinth of the MediPro dispatch center. I could picture it perfectly. The flickering fluorescent lights, the sad-looking potted ficus in the corner, the low drone of dozens of customer service agents reciting from scripts. I punched my way through their automated phone tree with the skill of a seasoned hacker, finally reaching a live and very confused human being named Brenda. Yes, hello, Brenda. Good morning, I said, shifting my tone into my most official-sounding, authoritative voice. This is Alex Sterling, calling regarding order number 74J2B. Yes, that's the one. The medical oxygen delivery for my father, George Sterling. There's been a critical change of plans. We're invoking Federal Medical Logistics Mandate 34C, paragraph 6, which allows for patient-directed transfer and retrieval in cases of localized access denial by a non-governmental entity. I had, of course, just pulled that mandate directly out of thin air, but it sounded good. It sounded official. I could hear the frantic clicking of Brenda's keyboard on the other end. I'm not familiar with that mandate, sir, she said, her voice hesitant. It's a recent addendum to the Health Security Act, I said smoothly, layering on the jargon. Part of the post-pandemic supply chain integrity initiative. Very important stuff. Look, to save time and cut through the red tape, just cancel the rescheduled truck delivery. I have arranged for a private courier service to pick up the full order directly from your regional supply depot at McLean Airfield. They have all the necessary paperwork and authorization. Just have the crates ready on the loading dock for an aerial transfer in 20 minutes. An aerial transfer? Brenda stammered, her confusion palpable even through the phone. That's correct. It's a new drone delivery service the government is testing. Very high-tech. You probably wouldn't have heard of it yet. Now, if you could just authorize the release for pickup, that would be wonderful. It's a matter of medical urgency. More typing. I could hear her muffled voice as she consulted with a supervisor. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she came back on the line with a sigh of weary resignation. Okay, sir. The order has been authorized for courier pickup at the depot. Thank you, Brenda, I said, my voice dripping with sincerity. You're a credit to your organization and a true patriot. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, a feeling of pure, unadulterated, triumphant satisfaction washing over me. The gears were in motion. The pieces were on the board. The trap was set. Now I just had to prepare the landing zone. Armed with a 50-foot tape measure and a box of my kids' jumbo sidewalk chalk, I strode into my backyard with a newfound sense of purpose. The yard was my weekend pride and joy. A perfect rectangle of meticulously cared-for grass, a small paver patio, and a few well-placed azalea bushes. It was about to become an active airfield. I paced it out, my mind's eye overlaying the schematics of a CH-47 Chinook, calculating the rotor diameter and the required clearance from the house and the fence. I found the center of the largest open patch, and with broad, sweeping strokes, drew a massive, bold X in bright blue chalk on the vibrant green grass. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet old lady who was 80% curtains and 10% gossip, was definitely watching. I could feel her eyes on me from her kitchen window. I gave a cheerful, slightly maniacal wave in her direction. The lace curtains twitched violently and were then pulled shut. The neighborhood Facebook group, a digital cesspool of passive-aggressive complaints about dog poop and pictures of lost cats, must have lit up like a Christmas tree. I could almost hear the frantic, pearl-clutching typing from across the cul-de-sac. Carol B. Does anyone know what Alex Sterling is doing in his backyard? He's drawing some kind of strange giant symbol on his lawn. Is this a cult thing? Tom P. Is that even allowed? That has to be a violation. I think that requires a permit from the Architectural Review Committee. Karen W., HOA President. I am on my way to investigate this unauthorized activity immediately. All residents are reminded that any and all ground markings must be pre-approved. This is completely unacceptable. And sure enough, like a moth drawn to a bonfire, Karen appeared at my low, decorative backyard fence line, clipboard already in hand, her face a thundercloud of righteous fury. "Alex," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is the meaning of this? Any landscaping, hardscaping, or ground markings must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. I have reviewed the recent submissions, and I do not recall seeing one from you for a giant blue X." I didn't even look up from my work, getting on my hands and knees to make the lines of the X thicker and more pronounced. "Just recalibrating my sprinkler system, Karen," I said, my voice carrying easily across the lawn. "Using a new satellite-guided alignment method. It's very precise. Wouldn't want to accidentally overwater your precious petunias on the other side of the fence, would we?" She sputtered, clearly not buying a word of it, but momentarily thrown off by the technical-sounding nonsense. "I'm watching you, Alex," she finally managed, her pen scratching furiously across her clipboard. "I'm documenting all of this. Every violation." "You do that, Karen," I said, admiring my handiwork. "You get it all down. You wouldn't want to miss a thing." I was just starting to clear the lightweight aluminum patio furniture, stacking the chairs against the side of the house well out of the way, when the inevitable happened. Someone, and I had a very strong, visor-wearing suspect, had called the police. A black and white squad car, looking as out of place as a shark in a swimming pool on our street of beige conformity, pulled up to the curb. I noted with some satisfaction that the driver had conscientiously avoided the forbidden yellow line, parking a respectable 20 feet away. 2 officers got out. The driver was the older of the 2, with a magnificent salt and pepper mustache that had clearly seen its share of bad coffee and a weary, seen-it-all look in his eyes. The one in the passenger seat was young, barely out of the academy, with a haircut so sharp you could probably use it to level a picture frame. They were, according to their name tags, Officer Miller and Officer Davis. Karen practically sprinted towards them, a triumphant glint in her eyes. This was it, the moment of reckoning she had been waiting for. The cavalry had finally arrived to put the rogue, chalk-drawing resident in his place. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This man is a menace to our community. He's been making clandestine phone calls from his office. He's defacing his property with strange symbols, and he's planning something nefarious, I just know it." Miller, the older cop, ambled over to me with the unhurried gait of a man who was counting the days to retirement. Davis, the rookie, stood back a few paces, his hand hovering near his belt, his face a mask of stern, official seriousness. "Sir," Miller said, his voice a low, tired rumble that seemed to emanate from his very soul. "We got a call about, well, to be honest, we're not entirely sure. Something about unauthorized ground markings and suspicious behavior." I leaned against a patio table I had just moved, folding my arms and adopting my most harmless, law-abiding citizen persona. "Officers, nice day, isn't it? I was just doing a bit of yard work. Is that a crime in this neighborhood now? I admit I may have lost track of the rules." "He's lying!" Karen shrieked, her voice cracking with excitement. "He's planning something. I heard him on the phone myself. He was talking about a hostile authority." I held up my hands in mock surrender. "Guilty as charged, officers. You got me. I was ordering a pizza. I asked for extra pineapple. My wife, who is Italian-American, considers pineapple on pizza to be a hostile act against her entire culture. You want to charge me for that, too? I'll come quietly." Miller's magnificent mustache twitched. I could see a flicker of amusement, quickly suppressed, in his tired eyes. Davis, however, was not amused in the slightest. "Sir, we're going to need you to be serious with us," Davis said, his hand now resting on his notepad. "I am being perfectly serious," I replied, my tone even and polite. "I'm a tax-paying, law-abiding citizen enjoying a sunny day on my own property. I haven't broken any laws. Have I, officers?" Miller let out a long, drawn-out sigh, a sound that spoke of 1,000 petty neighborhood disputes over garbage cans, parked cars, and barking dogs. He looked at me. He looked at the giant chalk X on my lawn. He looked at Karen, who was practically vibrating with righteous indignation, waiting for the handcuffs to come out. He knew something was up. He just didn't know what. And more importantly, he knew there wasn't a single thing he could legally do about it at that moment. "All right, sir," Miller said, turning to leave. "Just keep it down, whatever it is you're doing." He then nodded curtly at Karen. "And ma'am, we'll handle it from here. Thank you for your civic-mindedness." They got back in their car, leaving Karen fuming on the sidewalk, robbed of her glorious victory. As they pulled away, Miller caught my eye in his rearview mirror. He gave me a look that was one part warning, one part grudging respect, and one part sheer, unadulterated curiosity. It was a look that said, "I don't have a clue what you're about to do, son, but I have a sinking feeling it's going to generate a mountain of paperwork for me." He wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong at all. The real show was about to begin. The first sign was not a sight, but a sound. It wasn't loud at first, but rather a deep, rhythmic thump, thump, thump that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. It was a sound that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears, a bass note played on the very air itself. It grew steadily, relentlessly, from a distant, ignorable pulse to a ground-shaking, window-rattling roar. The first window to vibrate was my own kitchen window, a low hum that quickly escalated into a frantic rattle. Then the neighbors. A dog down the street, a normally placid golden retriever, started barking hysterically, a panicked, desperate sound. Then, one by one, as if in a chain reaction, car alarms began to shriek in protest, their electronic whoops and sirens adding their discordant voices to the rising cacophony. My neighbors, drawn by the ever-increasing, house-shaking noise, began to pour out of their beige houses. They stood on their perfectly manicured lawns, shielding their eyes with their hands and staring up at the clear blue sky, their faces masks of confusion and alarm. What new madness had descended upon their peaceful, orderly suburban enclave? I looked for Karen. She was standing in the middle of the street, frozen, a statue of disbelief. Her face, which moments before had been a mask of smug authority, was now slack-jawed, her carefully constructed composure shattered. The clipboard, her scepter of power, her symbol of absolute authority, lay forgotten on the hot asphalt at her feet. And then we all saw it. It crested the tops of the majestic oak trees at the end of the cul-de-sac, a monstrous, olive-drab beast that seemed to blot out the sun. It was Ivan's CH-47 Chinook, the Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, a twin-rotor behemoth designed to ferry platoons of soldiers into hot landing zones, not to deliver medical supplies to a street named Whispering Pines Lane. It was the most gloriously, beautifully, absurdly oversized solution to a problem I had ever had the pleasure of conceiving. Ivan, I had to admit, was a true artist. He didn't just fly the helicopter, he conducted it like a symphony of intimidation. He brought the giant machine down slowly, majestically, its twin rotors beating the air into submission. The downdraft was immense, a miniature man-made hurricane that ripped through the neighborhood with violent force. Leaves that had been resting peacefully on lawns for weeks were whipped into a swirling green vortex. A pink flamingo lawn ornament, a tacky beacon of suburban kitsch, was torn from its metal moorings and sent tumbling down the street like a piece of litter. Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning rose bushes, the ones that had earned her a coveted blue ribbon at the county fair, were flattened against the ground as if stomped on by an invisible giant. The Chinook hovered, its belly just 50 feet above the ground, its position as steady and unmoving as if it were parked on solid rock. It was aligned with a terrifying precision directly over the bright blue chalk X I had drawn on my lawn. The noise was a physical presence, a deafening, overwhelming roar that made thought impossible. All you could do was stare, your mouth agape. Then, with a low hydraulic groan, the rear cargo door of the helicopter lowered like the drawbridge of a medieval fortress, and the operation began. A heavy-duty cargo net, bulging with the unmistakable shapes of a dozen heavy, green, H-sized oxygen tanks, was winched down from the hovering giant. And as it descended towards my lawn, a new sound cut through the roar of the rotors, the high-pitched, frantic shriek of tires on asphalt. Big T's flatbed truck, a bright yellow Kenworth that looked like it could haul a building, came barreling down the street, completely and utterly ignoring the now comical "no parking" sign and the pathetic yellow line. The driver, a guy with a magnificent beard that reached his chest and a look of intense, zen-like focus, slammed on the brakes, bringing the massive truck to a perfect, screeching halt directly in front of my driveway. With a pneumatic hiss, a forklift slid off the back, its operator already revving the engine. My neighbors watched, their faces a gallery of slack-jawed disbelief, as a team of 2 men in matching gray overalls and yellow hard hats sprinted from the truck. They moved with the synchronized, no-wasted motion grace of a Formula One pit crew. The moment the cargo net touched the grass with a soft thud, they were on it, their hands a blur as they unhooked the heavy-duty clasps. The forklift, operated with surgical precision, zipped forward, its tines sliding cleanly under the specially designed pallet holding the crated tanks. The entire process was a stunning ballet of industrial efficiency. The forklift lifted the massive, multi-ton load as if it were a bag of groceries, spun on a dime, and drove directly into my open, 2-car garage, placing the crates gently on the concrete floor with barely a sound. The whole thing, from the moment the net touched down to the moment the forklift was back on the flatbed truck, took less than 4 minutes. I had been standing in my driveway the entire time, a silent observer of the beautiful chaos I had unleashed. I had put on a pair of classic aviator sunglasses, not just to protect my eyes from the swirling dust and debris, but because it felt like the moment demanded it. I looked up and caught Ivan's eye in the cockpit high above me. He gave me a jaunty salute. I returned it with a solid, appreciative thumbs up. The cargo delivered, the Chinook's rear door began to close. Ivan pulled back on the cyclic, and the massive helicopter, its duty done, ascended with a surprising, almost shocking speed. It banked sharply over the houses, the thump, thump, thump of its rotors already fading as it disappeared over the trees as quickly and as dramatically as it had arrived. The roar faded, leaving behind a silence that was somehow more profound and more shocking than the noise it had replaced. It was a silence broken only by the plaintive, dying wail of a single, traumatized car alarm down the street. Karen was a statue of pure, undiluted, apoplectic fury. Her perfectly coiffed hair was a wild, wind-blasted mess. Her beige visor was askew. Her face was streaked with dirt and possibly leaf fragments. She was screaming, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but her words had been swallowed and carried away by the wind and the rotors. Her power, her authority, her entire world built on the flimsy foundation of petty rules and regulations had been utterly and completely obliterated by the sheer, magnificent, rotor-bladed audacity of what had just happened. Just as the last echo of the helicopter faded into the distance, a new, more familiar sound filled the void. The high-low wail of a police siren. Miller and Davis's squad car came screeching back onto the scene, its lights flashing. They slammed to a halt, and both officers got out, their expressions a mixture of awe, terror, and profound exhaustion. They stared at the empty sky where a military-grade helicopter had just been, then at the forklift being expertly loaded back onto the flatbed, then at the dozen perfectly stacked crates of medical oxygen in my garage, and finally at me. Miller, the veteran cop, took off his hat and wiped his brow with the back of his hand in a slow, deliberate gesture. "Okay," he said, his voice heavy with a resignation that went beyond mere tiredness. "I'm gonna need to see the paperwork for all of this." This was the moment I had been waiting for. I calmly walked over to him and handed him a neatly organized, multi-tabbed folder. "Right here, officer," I said, my voice steady. "You'll find the FAA flight plan, Filed this morning and approved for a temporary private property landing with the property owner's notarized consent. You'll also find the commercial delivery permit for the forklift and its operator. And, my personal favorite, a temporary noise ordinance variance I filed with the county clerk's office at 8:45 a.m. for, emergency agricultural equipment testing. Davis, the rookie, was sputtering, his by-the-book brain short-circuiting. You can't just land a helicopter, a Chinook, in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Actually, officer, you can, I said, unable to keep a slight, triumphant smirk off my face. I checked. Town Charter, Section 12, Paragraph 4. It prohibits sustained aviation operations from a residential property, but it makes a specific exception for temporary, non-commercial landings on private property with the owner's permission. It's an old clause, probably written back when this was all farmland and people had crop dusters. It's never been amended, and since it's my property, I gave myself permission. Karen had finally found her voice again and was now babbling incoherently about property values, aesthetic uniformity, the structural integrity of her roof, and her flattened, award-winning rose bushes. No one was paying the slightest bit of attention to her. Officer Miller flipped through the paperwork in the folder. He looked at the official stamps, the signatures from the FAA and the county clerk, the perfectly cited and perfectly legal loopholes. He looked at the life-saving oxygen tanks, sitting safe and sound in my garage. He looked at Karen, who now looked like she had just survived a tornado in a wind tunnel. Then he looked back at me. He let out a long, slow sigh, the sigh of a man who was paid far, far too little to deal with this level of creative, bureaucratic warfare. Well, he said, handing the folder back to me with an air of finality. Everything appears to be in order. Technically. He then turned his weary, world-beaten gaze on Karen. Ma'am, he said, his voice devoid of all sympathy, I think you need to go home. Big T's crew, with the same quiet, intimidating efficiency they had displayed throughout the operation, finished securing the forklift on the flatbed, gave me a single, respectful nod, and drove away, leaving behind only the scent of diesel fumes and victory. The neighborhood was quiet again, but it was a fundamentally different kind of quiet. The air, which a moments before had been thick with rotor wash and righteous indignation, was now filled with something else entirely, a palpable mixture of awe, fear, and a healthy, newfound dose of respect. My neighbors were no longer whispering. They were staring, openly and unabashedly, at my house, at my garage, at me. Their expressions were no longer those of nosy, gossiping suburbanites, but of people who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite comprehend, like seeing a unicorn peacefully grazing on a lawn. I had single-handedly redrawn the social map of the neighborhood. My property line was no longer just a suggestion on a plat map. It was an international border, and I was a sovereign, well-supplied nation. I turned and walked back into my house. The roar of the helicopter had been so all-encompassing that Dad, whose hearing wasn't what it used to be, had only just registered the full extent of the commotion. He was standing at the living room window, peering out at the yard with a puzzled expression. "Did I miss something?" he asked, turning to me as I entered. "I thought I heard a funny noise. Sounded like a giant, angry bumblebee was trying to mate with the house." "Just the new oxygen delivery, Dad," I said, clapping him gently on the shoulder. "They've started a new express service. Very efficient." He squinted at the lawn, which now bore the distinct circular impressions of a massive cargo pallet. "Huh," he said, rubbing his chin. "Seems a little aggressive for customer service, but if it works, it works." I went into the garage, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly cavernous space. I selected one of the new, full green tanks from its crate, undid the straps, and wheeled it inside. I deftly detached the nearly empty tank from the concentrator and, with a few practiced turns of the wrench, hooked up the new one. The gentle, steady hiss of pure oxygen filling the lines was the most beautiful and satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of victory. It was the sound of a battle won. It was the sound of my father breathing easy. A few days passed. The neighborhood slowly, cautiously returned to its state of manicured tranquility, but the undercurrent had irrevocably changed. The polite, vacant waves I usually received during my morning walks were replaced with quick, respectful nods. Mrs. Henderson's curtains still twitched when I walked by, but now it seemed less like surveillance and more like she was checking to make sure I wasn't launching a weather satellite from my patio. Then, one afternoon, a familiar, bright yellow truck from Big T's heavy and possibly unethical logistics pulled up to my house. A man named Gus, built like a fire hydrant with a friendly, lived-in face and arms like tree trunks, got out and rang my doorbell. "Alex," he said, extending a calloused hand that completely enveloped my own. "Gus, the boss, T, sent me by. Said you might be interested in a follow-up project. A little something extra." I led him into the backyard. He surveyed the scene with a professional eye, taking in the faint, chalky remnants of the X on the lawn, and the low decorative fence I shared with Karen's now decimated rose garden. "So," Gus began, a conspiratorial twinkle in his eye, "T mentioned you might be looking for a privacy enhancement. We could put in a nice, tall, and I mean very tall, fence. Maybe some fast-growing cypress trees? Something that says my home is my castle, in a very, very literal way." "The HOA has a strict 8-foot height limit on all fences," I said, already knowing he had a solution. Gus grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "That's the beauty of it, my friend. I read the bylaws myself. The way the rule is written, the 8-foot limit applies per fence. It doesn't say a single, solitary word about not being able to build 2 fences, say 1 inch apart from each other. We could give you a 16-foot-tall, legally sound, double fence. It would be a modern marvel of architectural spite." I liked Gus. I liked the way he thought. "Draw something up," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "Let's see what it looks like." We were no longer just reacting to threats. We were fortifying. We were engaging in a cold war of subtle, meticulously researched, legally sound attrition. Exactly 1 week after the great helicopter incident of Tuesday, a crisp, white, official-looking envelope appeared in my mailbox. It bore the embossed insignia of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association. I braced myself as I pulled it out, expecting another fine, perhaps for unauthorized helicopter-related lawn compaction, or disturbing the peace with acts of awesome. I tore it open. Inside was not a fine, but the monthly community newsletter. And there, on the front page, in a small, discreet font, was a notice that made my heart sing. The board of directors announces that, effective immediately, Karen W. has resigned from her position as HOA president for personal reasons. The board thanks her for her years of dedicated service and wishes her well in her future endeavors. I read it again, savoring every word. Resigned. Personal reasons. I had a feeling those personal reasons included recurring nightmares featuring the sound of twin rotor blades and the sudden, dramatic, and violent loss of all her prized roses. But there was more. Tucked away on the second page, under the heading Proposed Bylaw Amendments, was a revision to Section 7, subparagraph B, the very rule that had started this whole glorious mess. The new proposed wording clarified that all marked emergency and medical supply vehicles were explicitly exempt from all community parking restrictions and were to be given immediate and unimpeded access at all times. I stood there in my driveway, the letter in my hand, and smiled. A real, genuine, soul-deep smile. I looked back at my house. My dad was sitting on the patio, basking in the afternoon sun, comfortably shaded by the new, ridiculously tall, and technically 100% legal double fence that now lined that side of the property. He was reading a book, the thin, clear tube feeding him a steady, silent supply of oxygen, his breathing even and relaxed. I took a sip of my coffee. It was a $12 artisanal blend from Ethiopia, and today it didn't taste like dirt and existential dread. It tasted like sweet, sweet, unequivocal victory. The neighborhood was quiet. The lawns were manicured. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of respect. The quiet of knowing that some people, when pushed, don't just push back. They call in air support. And that, I thought to myself, is the true bedrock of a secure and peaceful community.